I just watched the BB Unlocked, and I have a couple quick thoughts. Obviously, Taylor said she wants feedback, so here's some feedback I'm sending out for people to think about. First of all, I thought the episode was really solid. It's kind of the TV show version of a podcast. The problem is it's the TV show version of a podcast, which I think can sometimes leave the thing feeling overproduced rather and less authentic, which can work in some ways and can struggle in others. I think at the core, it needs to feel authentic. I think SportsCenter can often feel very authentic. Some of that's because they're very fast and sharp with their pacing, but some of it's also just that they let conversation be the driver rather than have the segments be the driver. I think one of the ways to fix this is to lean a bit more into clips and then discussion, clips and discussion. And um, I think another thing that's something I struggled with is like things like some of the clips were like potty humor, which that was a struggle. I think we had a bunch of segments where good thing, bad thing, good thing, bad thing, from good move, big move, bad move. You had the cringeworthy, bingeworthy, and you also had wine or wine with Nicole Franzel, which was kind of an unnecessary segment, but not necessarily bad or good. The main struggle for me comes from when you go down a bit into like the weeds of the episode, the overall like tone and analysis. I think Derek really struggled to find sort of a point of view. One of the reasons for that is that he is kind of supposed to be the nerd of the cast. I don't know what's going on this late. He's trying to be the nerd of the cast, but he's not the most nerdy person, especially about the show. He's a lot more the like base level strategy and just very good at that. And a lot more of it's social and positioning. And so his point of view can feel kind of unclear. Whereas for some other people, it like for Taylor, it's a little stronger because she has the feeds backing. And that's very clear in like the draft, where you have the podcast or the draft guy who's giving stats about the show. They're really great and insightful. But there's what is happening with this light? Jesus. Um, and so there's some struggles, I think, for Derek in terms of finding his point of view. And as such, it feels like the things he has to say don't feel like they carry a lot of weight because it's not clear where he is. And then lines like Taylor's "Of course you would" don't make a lot of sense because there's not a clear frame of reference for who Derek is. If Taylor was like said, "Of course you do because blank," because you're of course you do because you're always a contrarian. That works a lot better than of course you do, which has nothing to back it up. And it feels like that's an example of like what feels like fake chemistry, right? In terms of the clips, I thought they were great. The Amy revealing the that her being the accomplice was a surprise. It was not expecting. It was cool. The Ava Rachel thing was a great alliance that they had at the end was a great example of them being, hey, here's the question the feedsters have. Let's answer it. Which is, did they say this? Was it the context was unclear? Where we got it was kind of unclear. Okay, here's the answer, and Ainvia confirms that that was proposed. We'll see if they carry on with it, but it was really good there. I think one of the struggles they have is sort of balancing the live feed side versus the the base show analysis because these are two different entities, right? The live feed analysis is often based on an absurd amount of evidence and often is really focused on positioning and who people are looking at targeting and who people are not thinking about at all, right? Things as we know these details at a high level. Whereas show analysis is often more around like who's in the alliances, who is seems to be running the house, who's making good moves. And those two things aren't necessarily always super cohesive, especially early on. So, for example, I know that Zach's in great position, but the audience doesn't really, because they just see Zach as kind of in the big hitters, but sort of on the not in the core group. Whereas in the reality, everyone likes Zach. Everyone wants to work with Zach. He has a lot of connections. Vince has a lot of connections. That was one they did a good job showing with his Final Two stuff. I thought that was really good. I wish there was someone who said Final Twos aren't necessarily a bad thing to have if as long as they believe it, and you can juggle all the plates, right? You also have, and then I think one thing I would have loved to have seen would be like an alliance chart, sort of like alliance analysis. Hey, here's a picture of the house. Here's who's working with each other. Sort of a base level resetting for everyone who's watching to be like, okay, I understand where everything is as we move into the next week. I think it's a good place to do that kind of thing because they don't have to also then figure out all the like, hey, I'm working with all the nom stuff or the veto stuff or the who's going home. And it's a good place for them, I think, to do some clips that are based on like, let's talk about where the house is and give you some thoughts about what this means. Like, and I think one of the problems that this runs into then is because the feedsters know this stuff, the casuals don't. It means when Taylor says Ava is her number one, which I think is a cool take. I don't think I quite agree, but I think she's really up there. It's Derek's going, what? Because Derek doesn't have that same level of understanding and foundation. And so the conversation becomes, oh, well, because she's a good personality. When the answer is really, well, she's in this alliance and she's in this alliance, and these people want to work with her, and everyone who's should be thinking of her as an outsider aren't even like looking at her, and she's a social butterfly. She's building a lot of good connections. People like Mickey would never put her up. And meanwhile, she's on the other side, and Mickey should be looking at her group of people. And it's really great what Ava's doing. And I don't think all of it's intentional, but I think it's part of what's so lovely. But Derek doesn't know that. Like the feedsters don't have, or the video watchers don't have that context. And so I think it can make that kind of complicated. The other sort of thought was with celebrity guests. I thought it was interesting. I would have loved a segment that like leaned into the celebrity guests, sort of talk more about like I know they talked briefly about like Monahan talked about like he watched the show, what kind of ways he watched the show would have been nice, but also let's have a segment that's inspired by his past. If we're doing a lot of good or bad, we can do something along the lines of like quick thinking. And you can ask Bobby some questions and some insights about what like improv or reacting to things that you didn't expect is, and lean into some of that for his analysis to give him a bit of a frame of reference that is more interesting than I'm just a fan who's kind of here. And I think that would help a bunch with the bring some more personality in, especially when Derek's starting his frame of view is not as super clear. It creates a bit of a contrast. I also think you could do something like Taylor saying, "Oh, I watch the feeds," and Derek says, "I watch the episodes." And I think they could lean into some of that dynamic 'cause it seems a bit of what Derek does. He like loosely knows what's going on, but he's so much more a episodes watcher that I think it'd be interesting to sort of have that approach to the extent that they're going to struggle to back things up with feeds knowledge because of the stuff. I think overall I would like more clips, more stuff, like use it more as a way to say, here's context you're missing. They did that a bit with the Riley. They did it a bit with the Vince's Final Twos. I thought all those were great. I would love them to say, hey, here's some stuff that wasn't on the episodes and make it very clear that's what it is. Because sometimes you're showing things that were on the episodes, sometimes you're showing things that weren't. And I'd like that to be a little bit more clear. But overall, I actually thought it was really solid. I'd be open to watching more of it. I'm not obsessed, but I enjoyed it. I would be curious to see more. I think often vibes that are turned into a TV show don't always quite work. I think if they have less things to talk about, or they either need like less things to talk about, more just discussion, or they need more like clips and more like and not like focus discussion, but like the more reactive discussion, I think. Those are sort of, I think, the two approaches that I feel like would help. I thought the Nicole Franzel thing just felt like such a filler. I don't think it worked. I don't. There's also this weird thing where you know how Nicole Franzel thinks about Rachel, and Rachel's family thinks about Nicole Franzel, and so some of the things there were a bit confusing, and I don't think it quite worked. I think if it's, I don't need any of the COVID era. We went to somebody's house and they filmed a quick segment for themselves. Like either have them in person or not. I want that the in-person vibe, not the digital vibe. Uh, those are my thoughts on BB Unlocked. Thank you guys so much for listening. Bye.